Early in the morning Jerub-Baal and all his men set up their camp at the spring of Harod. Jerub-Baal is also called Gideon. The Midianites were camped north of them. The Midianites were camped in the valley at the bottom of the hill called Moreh. Then the Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men to defeat the Midianites. I don't want the Israelites to brag that they saved themselves. So now, announce to the people, anyone who is afraid may leave Mount Gilead. He may go back home." And 22,000 men went back home. But 10,000 remained. Then the Lord said to Gideon, "There are still too many men. Take the men down to the water, and I will test them for you there. If I say, 'This man will go with you,' he will go. But if I say, 'That one will not go with you,' he will not go." So Gideon led the men down to the water. There the Lord said to him, "Separate them. Those who drink water by lapping it up like a dog will be in one group. Those who bend down to drink will be in the other group." There were 300 men who used their hands to bring water to their mouths. They lapped it as a dog does. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. Then the Lord said to Gideon, "I will save you, using the 300 men who lapped the water. And I will allow you to defeat Midian. Let all the other men go to their homes." So Gideon sent the rest of Israel to their homes. But he kept 300 men. He took the jars and the trumpets of those who went home. Now the camp of Midian was in the valley below Gideon. That night the Lord spoke to Gideon. He said, "Get up. Go down and attack the camp of the Midianites. I will allow you to defeat them. But if you are afraid to go down, take your servant Purah with you. When you come to the camp of Midian, you will hear what they are saying. Then you will not be afraid to attack the camp." Gideon is encouraged. So Gideon and his servant Purah went down to the edge of the enemy camp. The Midianites, the Amalekites, and all the peoples from the east were camped in that valley. There were so many of them they seemed like locusts. They had so many camels no one could count them. There were as many as there are grains of sand on the seashore. When Gideon came to the enemy camp, he heard a man talking. That man was telling his friend about a dream. He was saying, "Listen, I dreamed that a loaf of barley bread rolled into the camp of Midian. It hit the tent so hard that the tent turned over and fell flat." The man's friend said, "Your dream is about the sword of Gideon son of Joash, a man of Israel. God will let Gideon defeat Midian and the whole army." When Gideon heard about the dream and what it meant, he worshipped God. Then Gideon went back to the camp of Israel. He called out to them, "Get up. The Lord has defeated the army of Midian for you." Then Gideon divided the 300 men into 3 groups. He gave each man a trumpet and an empty jar. A burning torch was inside each jar. Gideon told the men, "Watch me and do what I do. When I get to the edge of the camp, do what I do. Surround the enemy camp. I and everyone with me will blow our trumpets. When we blow our trumpets, you blow your trumpets, too. Then shout, 'For the Lord and for Gideon.'" Midian is defeated. So Gideon and the 100 men with him came to the edge of the enemy camp. They came just after the enemy had changed guards. It was during the middle watch of the night. Then Gideon and his men blew their trumpets and smashed their jars. All 3 groups of Gideon's men blew their trumpets and smashed their jars. They held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands. Then they shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." Each of Gideon's men stayed in his place around the camp. But inside the camp, the men of Midian began shouting and running away. When Gideon's 300 men blew their trumpets, the Lord caused all the men of Midian to fight each other with their swords. The enemy army ran away to the city of Beth-shittah. It is toward Zererah. They ran as far as the border of the city of Abel-meholah. It is near the city of Tabbath. Then men of Israel from Naphtali, Asher, and all of Manasseh were called out to chase the Midianites. Gideon sent messengers through all the mountains of Ephraim. They said, "Come down and attack the Midianites. Take control of the Jordan River as far as Beth-barah. Do this before the Midianites can get to the river and cross it." So they called out all the men of Ephraim. They took control of the Jordan River as far as Beth-barah. The men of Ephraim captured 2 princes of Midian named Oreb and Zeb. The men of Ephraim killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb. They killed Zeb at the winepress of Zeb. And they continued chasing the Midianites. They cut off the heads of Oreb and Zeb and took them to Gideon. He was now east of the Jordan River. The men of Ephraim asked Gideon, "Why did you treat us this way? Why didn't you call us when you went to fight against Midian?" They were very angry at Gideon. But he answered them, "I have not done as well as you. The small part you did was better than all that my people of Abiezer did. God allowed you to capture Oreb and Zeb, the princes of Midian. How can I compare what I did with what you did?" When the men of Ephraim heard Gideon's answer, they were not as angry anymore. Gideon captures 2 kings. Then Gideon and his 300 men came to the Jordan River. They were tired, but they chased the enemy across to the other side. Gideon said to the men of Sukkah, "Please give my soldiers some bread. They are very tired. I am chasing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." But the leaders of Sukkah said, "Why should we give your soldiers bread? You haven't caught Zebah and Zalmunna yet." Then Gideon said, "The Lord will help me capture Zebah and Zalmunna. After that, I will whip your skin with thorns and briars from the desert." Gideon left Sukkah and went to the city of Peniel. He asked the men there for food. It was just as he had asked the men of Sukkah. And the men of Peniel gave him the same answer as the men of Sukkah. So Gideon said to the men of Peniel, "After I win the victory, I will come back here. And I will pull down this tower." Zebah and Zalmunna and their army were in the city of Karkar. Their army had about 15,000 men. They were all who were left of the army of the peoples of the east. Already 120,000 soldiers of that army had been killed. Gideon used the road of those who live in tents. This road is east of Nobah and Jogbehah. Gideon attacked the enemy army when they did not expect it. Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian, ran away. But Gideon chased and captured them. Gideon and his men defeated the enemy army. Then Gideon son of Joash returned from the battle. He and his men returned by the pass of Heres. Gideon captured a young man from Sukkah and asked him some questions. The young man wrote down for Gideon the names of 77 men. They were the officers and elders of Sukkah. Gideon punishes Sukkah. Then Gideon came to Sukkah. He said to the men of that city, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna. You made fun of me by saying, 'Why should we give bread to your tired men?' You have not caught Zebah and Zalmunna yet." So Gideon took the elders of the city. He punished them with thorns and briars from the desert. He also pulled down the tower of Peniel. Then he killed the men in that city. Gideon spoke to Zebah and Zalmunna. He said, "You killed some men on Mount Tabor. What were those men like?" Zebah and Zalmunna answered, "They were like you. Each one of them seemed like a prince." Gideon said, "Those were my brothers, my mother's sons. As surely as the Lord lives, I would not kill you if you had spared them." Then Gideon turned to Jether, his oldest son. Gideon said to him, "Kill them." But Jether was only a boy and was afraid. So he did not take out his sword. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said to Gideon, "Come on. Kill us yourself." As the saying goes, it takes a man to do a man's job. So Gideon got up and killed Zebah and Zalmunna. Then he took the decorations off their camels' necks. Gideon makes an idol. The people of Israel said to Gideon, "You saved us from the Midianites. So now, rule over us. We want you, your son and your grandson to rule over us." But Gideon told them, "The Lord will be your ruler. I will not rule over you. And my son will not rule over you." He said, "I want you to do this one thing for me. I want each of you to give me a gold earring from the things you took in the fighting." The Ishmaelite men wore gold earrings. And some Ishmaelites had been defeated in the battle. So the people of Israel said to Gideon, "We will gladly give you what you want." So they put a coat down on the ground. Each man threw an earring onto the coat. The gold earrings weighed about 43 pounds. This did not count the weight of the other gifts the people gave to Gideon. They gave him decorations, necklaces, and purple robes. These were things that the kings of Midian had worn. The people also gave him chains from the camels of the kings of Midian. Gideon used the gold to make an idol. He put the idol in his hometown of Ophrah. All the people of Israel were unfaithful to God and worshipped the idol. It became a trap that caused Gideon and his family to sin. The death of Gideon. So Midian was forced to be under the rule of Israel. Midian did not cause trouble anymore. And the land had peace for 40 years, as long as Gideon was alive. Gideon son of Joash went to his home to live. He had 70 sons of his own. He had many sons because he had many wives. Gideon had a slave woman who lived in Shechem. He also had a son by her. He named that son Abimelech. So Gideon son of Joash died at a good old age. He was buried in the tomb of Joash, his father. That tomb is in Ophrah, where the Abiezrites live. As soon as Gideon died, the people of Israel were again unfaithful to God. They followed the Baal gods. They made Baal of the agreement their god. The Israelites did not remember the Lord their God. He had saved them from all their enemies who were living all around them. And Jerub-Baal, also called Gideon, had done many good things for Israel. But Israel was not kind to the family of Gideon for these things.